Karen Martinez had always believed that luck was something you made for yourself. At 32, she had perfected the art of taking what she needed when life didn't give it freely. Her fingers were quick, her smile was charming, and her excuses were always ready. She had learned long ago that the world owed her nothing, so she would take what she could get. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cathedral steps as Karen watched the changing of the royal guard. She had been studying their routine for 3 weeks now, noting every detail, every moment of vulnerability. The guards were impressive in their ceremonial uniforms, but Karen had learned that even the most disciplined people had patterns, habits that could be exploited. Guard Captain Thomas Whitmore stood at attention near the cathedral entrance. Was different from the others, older, more weathered, with kind eyes that seemed to see everything around him. What caught Karen's attention most was the silver cross that hung from a chain around his neck. It was no ordinary piece of jewelry. The cross was intricately carved, clearly old, and from Karen's experienced eye, definitely valuable. She had heard whispers in the streets about Captain Whitmore's cross. Some said it had been blessed by 3 different popes. Others claimed it had miraculous powers, that it had protected the captain through countless dangerous situations. Karen didn't believe in such nonsense, but she knew that rare religious artifacts could fetch thousands on the black market. Karen positioned herself among the crowd of tourists taking photos. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a large purse, the perfect disguise of an innocent visitor. Her heart raced with familiar excitement as she planned her approach. She had done this hundreds of times before, but never with such a high-profile target. The captain's routine was predictable. Every day at noon, he would step aside to speak with the cathedral's head priest. During their conversation, he would remove his ceremonial gloves and place them on a small table nearby. This was her window, maybe 30 seconds, when his attention would be completely focused on the priest. As the cathedral bells began to chime 12 o'clock, Karen moved closer. She pretended to admire the ancient stonework while keeping the captain in her peripheral vision. Right on schedule, Father Benedict emerged from the cathedral. Captain Whitmore stepped forward to greet him. Karen's breathing steadied as she entered what she called the zone. That focused state where time seemed to slow down and every movement became precise. She had learned to control her nerves years ago when her younger brother, Michael, was sick, and she had stolen medicine he couldn't afford. That first theft had been born of desperation, but it had taught her that sometimes you had to take action. When the world failed you, the captain removed his gloves and set them down, just as Karen had observed every day for 3 weeks. She moved with practiced casualness, bumping gently into him as if by accident. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said with her most apologetic smile. "I was just trying to get a better photo of this beautiful architecture." Captain Whitmore steadied her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Not to worry, miss. The cathedral is quite magnificent, isn't it?" His voice was warm and genuinely kind, which made Karen hesitate for just a moment. She wasn't used to targets who were actually nice to her. "It really is," she replied, letting her fingers work with expert precision. The chain was tucked beneath his uniform collar, but years of practice had taught her how to work around such obstacles. In one smooth motion, she lifted the chain over his head while he was looking up. At the cathedral spires she had pointed to, the stonework dates back to the 12th century. The captain was saying, completely unaware, that his treasured cross was now safely tucked in Karen's purse. Each stone was carved by master craftsmen who considered their work a form of prayer. Nodded enthusiastically, playing the part of the interested tourist. "That's amazing. Well, I should let you get back to your duties. Thank you for being so kind." She began to walk away, her heart pounding with the familiar rush of a successful theft. "Have a blessed day," Captain Whitmore called after her, and something in his tone made her glance back. He was smiling at her with genuine warmth, as if he truly meant those words. For a moment, Karen felt an unfamiliar twist of guilt in her stomach, but she pushed it away. She had more important things to worry about than the feelings of a stranger. As she walked down the cathedral steps, Karen could feel the weight of the cross in her purse. It was heavier than she had expected, and somehow that weight seemed to grow with each step she took away from the cathedral. She told herself it was just her imagination, that the guilt would pass as it always did. By tomorrow, she would have. Karen's apartment was small and cluttered, filled with the remnants of her various schemes and stolen goods. She set her purse on the kitchen table and carefully removed the silver cross. Under the harsh fluorescent light, it looked even more impressive than it had around the captain's neck. The silver gleamed despite its obvious age, and the intricate engravings seemed to tell a story she couldn't quite understand. She picked up her magnifying glass and examined the cross more closely. There were tiny inscriptions in what looked like Latin, and the craftsmanship was extraordinary. Every detail had been carved with incredible precision and care. This wasn't just jewelry, it was art, history, faith, all wrapped into one small object. Karen pulled out her laptop and began researching similar pieces online. Within an hour, she had found several comparable items that had sold at auction, for amounts that made her whistle softly. If this cross was authentic, and everything about it suggested it was, she was looking at enough money to solve her problems for months, maybe even a year. Her phone buzzed with a text from her landlord. The rent was due in 3 days, and she was already 2 weeks late. Another message followed from the mechanic who was holding her car hostage until she could pay the repair bill. Then came the usual reminder from the credit card company about her overdue payment. Karen felt the familiar knot of anxiety in her stomach. This cross couldn't have come at a better time. She called Marcus, her usual buyer for high-end stolen goods. "I've got something special," she told him, trying to keep the excitement out of her voice. "Religious artifact, probably 18th or 19th century museum quality." "Bring it by tonight," Marcus replied in his gravelly voice. "But Karen, you know how hot religious stuff can be, especially if it belongs to someone important." "Don't worry about that," Karen said, though she could feel her confidence wavering slightly. "The owner won't even notice it's gone for hours." After hanging up, Karen tried to settle into her usual routine after a successful theft. She made herself a sandwich, turned on the television, and attempted to relax. But something felt different. This time, the cross sat on her coffee table, and she couldn't stop looking at it. Every time she glanced away, she felt drawn to look back, as if it was calling for her attention. By evening, Karen's mood had shifted from triumphant to unsettled. She had tried putting the cross in a drawer, but that had only made her more anxious. When she brought it back out, she felt a strange sense of relief, followed immediately by confusion about her own behavior. She had stolen hundreds of items over the years, but none had affected her like this. The walk to Marcus's shop should have been routine, but every step felt heavy. Karen found herself moving slower than usual, her feet seeming reluctant to carry her forward. When she reached the familiar alley behind the pawn shop, she hesitated at the door. Her hand was raised to knock, but something held her back. Through the window, she could see Marcus examining a collection of watches with his jeweler's loupe. He was a good fence, reliable, fair in his prices, and discreet. She had done business with him dozens of times without any problems. So why did walking through that door feel like crossing a line she had never crossed before? Karen forced herself to knock. Marcus opened the door with his usual cautious expression, quickly ushering her inside and locking the door behind her. His shop was cramped and dimly lit, filled with the kinds of items that people sold when they were desperate, or that people like Karen brought when they were profitable. "Let's see what you've got," Marcus said, settling behind his desk. Karen opened her purse and carefully removed the cross, placing it on the felt mat Marcus used for examining valuable items. Marcus picked up the cross and immediately sucked in a breath. "Jesus, Karen, where did you get this?" He turned it over in his hands, examining every detail with growing amazement. This isn't just old, this is historic. Look at these engravings, this craftsmanship in the silver. This is the real deal. "How much?" Karen asked, trying to sound casual despite the strange churning in her stomach. Marcus was quiet for a long time, studying the cross under his magnifying glass. Finally, he looked up at her with an expression she had never seen before. "Karen, I've been in this business for 20 years. I've handled stolen goods worth millions, but this... He set the cross down carefully. "This feels different. Where exactly did you get this? Does it matter?" Karen replied, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. Yeah, it does. Marcus leaned back in his chair. 'Cause this isn't just valuable, it's powerful. I can feel it, can't you? Karen wanted to laugh at Marcus's sudden superstition, but the words stuck in her throat. She could feel it too, though she couldn't explain what it was. The cross seemed to radiate something, warmth, presence, an indefinable energy that made her skin tingle and her heart race. I can give you 15,000 for it, Marcus said finally. But Karen, I'm telling you as a friend, be careful with this one. Some things carry more weight than their price tag. $15,000. It was more than Karen had ever made from a single theft. It would solve all her immediate problems and give her breathing room for months. All she had to do was say yes and walk away. But as she reached for the cross, her hand began to tremble, and for the first time in years, Karen Martinez wasn't sure if she could go through with the sale. Karen stared at the cross lying on Marcus's felt mat, her hand frozen halfway toward it. The $15,000 Marcus offered would change everything for her. No more dodging phone calls from creditors. No more choosing between groceries and rent. No more desperate schemes just to survive. But something invisible seemed to be holding her back, like an unseen hand, gently but firmly keeping her from making the grab. I need a minute, she whispered, pulling her hand back to her side. Marcus nodded, understanding in his eyes. All the time you need. This isn't the kind of decision you rush. Karen stepped outside into the cool night air, but the strange feeling followed her. She walked to the end of the alley and leaned against a brick wall, trying to make sense of what was happening to her. She had never hesitated over a sale before. Money was money, and survival was survival. Why did her chest feel tight every time she thought about Marcus handing over that cash? She pulled out her phone and found herself scrolling through news. Articles about Captain Whitmore. What she read made her stomach sink even further. He wasn't just any royal guard. He was a decorated veteran who had served 3 tours overseas. The articles described his work with homeless veterans, his volunteer shifts at soup kitchens, owned his mentorship program for at-risk youth. One article from 6 months ago caught her attention. Captain Whitmore had saved a child from a house fire while off duty, carrying the boy to safety, despite suffering burns on his arms. When interviewed afterward, it credited his faith in the cross his grandmother had given him for giving him the strength to act. That cross has been in my family for 4 generations, he was quoted saying. It reminds me that we're called to serve others, especially when it's difficult. Karen felt sick. She had stolen from good people before that was unavoidable. In her line of work, but she had never taken something so deeply personal, so irreplaceably meaningful. The cross wasn't just valuable. It was a family heirloom, a source of strength, a symbol of everything the captain believed in. She walked back into Marcus's shop, her decisions still unmade. The cross seemed to gleam brighter under the lamp, as if it was trying to communicate something she couldn't quite hear. Marcus looked at her expectantly, the cash already counted and waiting on his desk. Tell me honestly, Karen said. Have you ever had something affect you like this before? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Once, about 10 years ago, someone brought me a wedding ring. Beautiful piece, worth maybe $2,000. But every time I looked at it, I kept thinking about the person who lost it. Turns out it belonged to an old man whose wife had died. He'd been mugged, and that ring was all he had left of her. What did you do? I gave it back, Marcus admitted. Took a loss on the money I'd already paid, but I couldn't live with keeping it. Some things are worth more than their price tag, you know? Karen picked up the cross and immediately felt that strange warmth spread through her fingers. It was like holding sunlight, or the memory of being comforted when she was afraid. She tried to remember the last time she had felt truly peaceful and realized it had been years. The captain, she said suddenly. I need to find out more about. Him? Marcus raised an eyebrow, but nodded toward his computer. Help yourself. Karen spent the next hour reading everything she could find about Thomas Whitmore. The more she learned, the worse she felt. He had grown up poor, just like her. He had worked 3 jobs to put himself through school, just like she had before. She gave up and turned to theft. The difference was that he had used his struggles to fuel compassion for others. While she had let hers harden her heart, She found a video interview from a local news station where Captain Whitmore talked about his faith. "People ask me how I stay positive after everything I've seen," he said, unconsciously touching the cross at his throat. "This cross reminds me that even in the darkest times, there's light. Even when I can't see it, I can trust it's there." Karen closed the laptop and sat in silence. The cross felt heavier in her hands now, not physically, but emotionally. She could almost feel the weight of 4 generations of faith, of prayers whispered in times of trouble, of hope carried through wars, and losses and everyday struggles. "I can't do it," she said finally. Marcus nodded as if he had been expecting this. "I figured as much. You want me to help you get it back to him?" "Have to do it myself," Karen replied, though the thought terrified her. She had never returned anything she'd stolen. She didn't even know how to begin such a conversation. "What will you tell him?" Marcus asked. "I don't know," Karen admitted. "Maybe the truth." As she prepared to leave, Marcus stopped her at the door. "Karen, can I ask you something? In all the years we've done business, you've never backed out of a deal. What's different about this?" 1. Karen looked down at the cross in her hands. Under the streetlight streaming through the window, she could just make out some of the tiny inscriptions. They seemed to be prayers, pleas for protection and strength, words of hope carved in silver and passed down through generations. "I think," she said slowly, "this is the first time I've stolen something that was more valuable to its owner than it could ever be to me." Marcus smiled sadly. "Maybe that's not the only thing that's different." As Karen walked home through the empty streets, she realized Marcus was right. Something fundamental had shifted inside her the moment she touched that cross. For the first time in years, she was thinking about someone else's pain instead of just her own needs. For the first time in years, she was choosing to do something difficult because it was right, not because it was profitable. The cross seemed to grow warmer in her hands as she walked, and Karen found herself wondering if Captain Whitmore had been right about its protective power, because somehow, despite facing the prospect of another month of unpaid bills and empty cupboards, she felt safer and more at peace than she had in years. Karen barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Captain Whitmore's kind face and heard his warm words. "Have a blessed day." She had replayed the theft 100 times in her mind, remembering how trusting he had been, how he had actually thanked her for bumping into him. The man had shown her nothing but kindness. She had repaid him by stealing his most precious possession. The cross sat on her nightstand. Even in the darkness, she could swear it was giving off a faint glow. She told herself it was just the streetlight filtering through her curtains, but she knew better. Something about this object defied rational explanation, and that scared her more than any angry victim or pursuing police officer ever had. Morning came too soon. Karen dressed carefully, choosing her most respectable clothes, a simple black dress and cardigan that made her look like she belonged in a cathedral. She practiced what she would say to Captain Whitmore, but every version sounded either ridiculous or incriminating. "How do you explain that you stole something, spent 12 hours planning to sell it, and then changed your mind because the object itself seemed to develop a conscience?" The walk to the cathedral felt like the longest journey of her life. With each step, Karen became more aware of the weight of the cross in her purse. It seemed to pull at her, not physically, but spiritually, as if it was eager to return home. She found herself walking faster, though whether she was rushing toward resolution or trying to outpace her own anxiety, she couldn't say. Captain Whitmore was at his usual post by the cathedral entrance. Karen watched him from across the square. Studying his demeanor, he looked tired, and she noticed him unconsciously reaching for his throat several times, touching the place where his cross should have been. The gesture was automatic, comforting, and seeing it made Karen's guilt intensify. Tenfold, she approached slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The captain noticed her coming and smiled with recognition. "The young lady who was interested in our architecture yesterday," he said warmly. "Back for another visit?" Actually, Karen began, then stopped. Her throat felt tight, and the words she had practiced seemed to evaporate. I need to speak with you privately. It's important." Something in her tone must have alerted him because his expression became more serious. "Of course, is everything all right?" Karen glanced around it. The tourists and other guards nearby. Could we... ... Is there somewhere more private we could talk? Captain Whitmore studied her face for a moment, then nodded. There's a small chapel inside where we can speak quietly. Follow me. They walked through the cathedral's massive doors into the hushed, sacred space beyond. The chapel Captain Whitmore led her to was tiny and peaceful, lit by candles and filled with the scent of centuries of prayer. Karen had never been religious, but something about the space made her feel both comforted and exposed, as if all her secrets were suddenly visible. Please sit, the captain said, gesturing to a wooden pew. What's troubling you? Karen sat down and immediately felt the weight of the cross in her purse become almost unbearable. She looked at Captain Whitmore, really looked at him, and saw not just the target she had marked for theft, but a man who had dedicated his life to serving others. A man who was probably worried sick about losing his family's most treasured possession. I have something that belongs to you, she said quietly. Captain Whitmore tilted his head, confused. I'm sorry. With trembling hands, Karen reached into her purse and withdrew the silver cross. Captain Whitmore's eyes widened, and his hand flew to his throat. My cross, he breathed, but how... where did you find it? I didn't find it, Karen said, her voice barely above a whisper. I stole it. Yesterday, when I bumped into you, I took it right off your neck. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen forced herself to look at Captain Whitmore's face, expecting to see anger, betrayal, disgust. Instead, she saw something much more complex. Surprise, yes, but also concern, and something that looked almost like relief. You came back, he said finally. I tried not to, Karen admitted. I had a buyer lined up. $15,000. That money would have solved all my problems, but I couldn't do it. Every time I looked at this cross, I thought about you, about what it meant to you. I read about your grandmother, about your family. I realized I wasn't just stealing jewelry, I was stealing a piece of your soul. Captain Whitmore reached out and gently took the cross from her hands. As soon as it left her fingers, Karen felt a strange mixture of loss and relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted, but something warm and protective had gone with it. Do you mind me asking? The captain said carefully. What made you change? Your mind? Karen laughed bitterly. I wish I had a good answer for that. I've been stealing things for 8 years. I've never returned anything before, but this. She gestured toward the cross, which Captain Whitmore was now holding reverently. This was different. It was like the cross itself wouldn't let me sell. Faith has a way of working in mysterious ways, Captain Whitmore said softly, even when we don't understand it ourselves. I don't have faith, Karen said quickly. I don't believe in God or miracles or any of that. I believe in taking care of yourself, because no one else will. And yet you're here, the captain pointed out gently. You gave up $15,000 to return something to a stranger. If that's not faith in action, I don't know what is. Karen felt tears starting to form in her eyes. I don't know why I did it. It doesn't make sense. I need that money. I'm behind on everything. Rent, bills, car payments. I'm probably going. To end up on the street? And for what? To feel good about myself for 5 minutes? Captain Whitmore was quiet for a long moment, turning the cross over in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. Do you believe people can change? I don't know, Karen answered honestly. I do, he said. I've seen it happen. I've lived it myself. 20 years ago, I was angry, lost, making terrible decisions. It was my grandmother's faith and this cross that showed me a different path. He looked directly into Karen's eyes. I think that cross chose you just as much as you chose to steal it. And I think bringing it back was just the beginning of your story, not the end. Karen stared at him, unsure whether to feel hope or terror. At the suggestion that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't control or predict, Captain Whitmore fastened the cross around his neck, and Karen immediately noticed the change in his posture. His shoulders relaxed, and some invisible tension she hadn't even realized he was carrying seemed to melt away. I've worn this cross every day for 15 years, he said. When I woke up this morning and realized it was gone, I felt like I'd lost a piece of myself. I'm sorry, Karen said, and meant it more than she had ever meant any apology in her life. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am truly sorry. Apology accepted, Captain Whitmore replied without hesitation. But more importantly, I want you to know that I admire your courage in coming back. That took real strength. Karen shook her head. It wasn't strength. I was terrified the whole time. I almost backed out 3 times on the walk here. Courage isn't the absence of fear, the captain said with a slight smile. It's doing what's right despite the fear. You could have kept the cross and the money, and I would never have known it was you. But you chose to face me instead. That's remarkable. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the candlelight flickering across the stone walls of the small chapel. Karen found herself really looking at the space for the first time. The worn wooden pews polished smooth by countless hands. The simple altar, the sense of peace that seemed to emanate from every corner. She had never understood why people found comfort in churches, but sitting here now, she began to get a glimpse of it. Can I ask you something? Karen said finally. What you said about being angry and lost 20 years ago. What happened? Captain Whitmore leaned back slightly, his hand unconsciously touching the cross at his throat. I came back from my first deployment overseas very different from when I left. I'd seen things, done things that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about right and wrong. I was drinking too much, fighting too much, pushing away everyone who cared about me. He paused, lost in the memory. My grandmother was the only person who didn't give up on me. She'd invite me for dinner every Sunday and I'd show up drunk. And angry, sometimes not show up at all. But she never stopped inviting me. One Sunday, she gave me this cross. She said it had been her father's, and his father's before that. She told me that when you carry faith, even when you don't feel it, it carries you back. Did you believe her? Karen asked. Not at first, Captain Whitmore admitted. But I wore the cross because it made her happy. And slowly, very slowly, something started to change. I can't explain it scientifically, but wearing it made me think differently. When I was about to make a bad decision, I'd touch the cross and remember my grandmother's words about being carried. It became like a conscience outside of myself. Karen thought about the strange warmth she had felt when holding the cross. Way it had seemed to pull her away from Marcus's shop and back toward the cathedral. I think I know what you mean, she said quietly. The real change came when I started focusing less on what I could take from the world and more on what I could give to it. That's when my life truly began to turn. Around I found purpose in serving others, in protecting people, in being someone my grandmother could be proud of. Karen felt a familiar tightness in her chest, but this time it wasn't anxiety, it was longing. I don't know how to be that person, she admitted. I've been taking care of only myself for so long, I don't even know what it would feel like to help someone else. It starts small, Captain Whitmore said gently. One choice at a time, one day at a time. You've already taken the first step by returning the cross. That was an act of service, even if you don't see it that way. But what about my practical problems? Karen asked, the weight of her financial situation crashing back down on her. I still owe money I don't have, and I still don't have any legitimate way to earn it. Good intentions don't pay rent. Captain Whitmore was quiet for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. There's a woman I know who runs a program helping people transition out of difficult circumstances. Her name is Sister Catherine, and she's helped a lot of people find legitimate work and stable housing. Would you be willing to meet with her? Karen took the card and stared at it. The address was for a community center just a few miles from her apartment. What would I tell her? The truth, Captain Whitmore said simply. Tell her that you're looking for a different path and you're willing to work for it. That's all she needs to hear. What if she asks about my background, about what I've done? Sister Catherine has worked with people from all walks of life. Trust me, nothing you could tell her would shock her. She's more interested in where you want to go than where you've been. Karen slipped the card into her purse, next to the space where the cross had been just minutes before. The emptiness there felt symbolic somehow, as if she had made room for something new. Why are you helping me? She asked. I stole from you. Most people would want me arrested. Captain Whitmore smiled, and in that smile, Karen saw echoes of his grandmother's unconditional love. 'Cause 20 years ago, someone helped me when they had every reason not to. because I believe that everyone deserves a chance to become who they're meant to be. And because something tells me that Cross was supposed to find its way to you, even if it had to come home first." As they stood to leave the chapel, Karen felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the desperate hope of someone looking for an easy solution, but the quiet, steady hope of someone ready to do hard work for a worthy cause. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a very long time, she was excited to find out. "Captain Whitmore," she said as they reached the chapel door. "Thank you, not just for not having me arrested, but for showing me that there might be another way to live." "The choice to change was yours, Karen," he replied. "I just pointed you in a direction. The real work begins now." As they walked back into the main cathedral, Karen noticed that the afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows seemed brighter than before, casting colorful patterns across the stone floor that looked almost like a path leading toward the doors and the world beyond. 6 months later, Karen Martinez walked through the same cathedral doors, but everything about her had changed. Her clothes were simple but clean and well-fitted. The uniform of the community center where she now worked as a counselor for people transitioning out of homelessness and addiction. Her hair was healthier, her eyes brighter, and most importantly, her hands were steady and open, no longer constantly calculating opportunities for theft. She found Captain Whitmore at his usual post, and when he saw her approaching, his face lit up with genuine joy. "Karen, how wonderful to see you. You look... He paused, searching for the right words. "You look peaceful." Karen laughed, a sound that came much more easily now than it had 6 months ago. "I feel peaceful mostly. It's still hard some days, but it's a different kind of hard. Good hard, if that makes sense." "It makes perfect sense," Captain Whitmore replied. "How are things going with Sister Catherine's program?" "Better than I ever imagined," Karen said, and meant it. The first meeting with Sister Catherine had been terrifying. Karen had expected judgment, condescension, or at best, pity. Instead, she had found a tough, practical woman who listened to Karen's story without flinching, and then laid out a clear path forward that involved hard work, accountability, and genuine support. The program had started with basic services: help finding temporary housing, assistance applying for legitimate jobs, and counseling to address the underlying issues that had led Karen to theft in the first place. But what had transformed her life wasn't just the practical support, it was discovering that she had skills and instincts that could be used to help others rather than exploit them. "I've been promoted," Karen said, unable to keep the pride out of her voice. "Sister Catherine is making me the lead counselor for new intakes. People who are where I was 6 months ago." "That's wonderful," Captain Whitmore said warmly, "though I can't say I'm surprised. You always had the ability to read people, to understand what they needed. Now you're using that gift to help instead of harm." Karen nodded, thinking about her latest client, a young man about her age, who had been living on the streets for 2 years after losing his job and apartment. When she first met with him, she had recognized the same desperate calculation in his eyes that she used to see in her own mirror. The same belief that the world owed him nothing, and he had to take whatever he could get. "It's strange," she said. "When I talk to people who are going through what I went through, I can see so clearly how they're trapped in their own thinking, how they've convinced themselves that they don't have choices when they actually do. But when I was in that place, I couldn't see it at all." "That's what makes you effective now," Captain Whitmore observed. "You can meet them where they are because you've been there yourself, but you can also show them the way out because you've walked that path." Karen touched the small silver pendant at her throat, not the captain's cross, but a simple piece Sister Catherine had given her when she completed the program. It was inscribed with a single word: hope. She wore it every day now, just as Captain Whitmore wore his family cross, as a reminder of the person she had chosen to become. "I have something to tell you," Karen said, her voice becoming more serious. "Last week a man came to the center. He was desperate, angry, talking about how the system had failed him, and he was going to take what he needed to survive. I recognized that look in his eyes. I'd worn it myself for years." Captain Whitmore listened intently as Karen continued. "I sat with him for 3 hours. I told him my story, all of it. Taking your cross, about the night I almost sold it and how returning it changed everything. By the end of our conversation, he was crying. He said no one had ever been that honest with him about their own mistakes. "What happened to him?" Captain Whitmore asked. "In the program," Karen said with a smile. "He's been clean for a week now, and he's got his first job interview tomorrow. I'll be going with him for support." Captain Whitmore's eyes were bright with emotion. "Do you see what's happened, Karen? The cross coming back to me wasn't the end of its journey, it was the beginning. It's through you. It's still out there, still changing lives." Karen felt a warmth spread through her chest, the same feeling she had experienced that night when she first held the cross. "I never thought about it that way, but you're right. Every person I help, every story I share, it's like passing on what I received from you." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the tourists and pilgrims who came and went through the cathedral doors. Karen thought about all the times she had stood in this same spot, watching people and calculating what she might be able to take from them. Now she found herself wondering what she might be able to give them instead. "Captain Whitmore," she said finally, "I need you to know that returning your cross was the hardest and best thing I've ever done. Not because it was the right thing to do, though it was, but because it taught me that I could choose to be someone different than who I had always been." "And look who you've become," he replied softly. "Someone who guides others toward the light, someone who turns pain into purpose. I think my grandmother would have liked you very much." Karen felt tears in her eyes, but they were good tears, tears of gratitude and hope rather than despair. "I wish I could have met her." "In a way you did," Captain Whitmore said, touching his cross. "Her faith, her love, her belief that people can change. It's all still here, still working in the world through people like you." As Karen prepared to leave for her afternoon shift at the center, she turned back one more time. "Captain, do you really believe that Cross chose me that day?" He smiled, the same warm smile that had greeted her even when she was a stranger planning to steal from him. "I believe that love finds a way to where it's needed most, even when we can't see the path ourselves. You were lost, and somehow, through mystery and grace and your own brave choices, you found your way home." Karen walked down the cathedral steps with a lightness in her step that would have been impossible 6 months ago. She had learned that faith wasn't about believing in things you couldn't see. It was about believing in the possibility that people, including yourself, could become better than they ever imagined. As she headed toward the community center, where former thieves and addicts and lost souls worked together to help other thieves and addicts and lost souls find their way, Karen Martinez carried with her the unshakable knowledge that no one was beyond redemption, no choice was irreversible, and no act of faith, no matter how small or frightened or unlikely, was ever wasted. The cross had taught her its most important lesson, that the greatest treasures weren't the ones you could steal, but the ones you chose to give away.